I want to talk about the basic structure of a sonnet. And often when we do videos like this, we'll start with someone like Petrarch or Shakespeare or one of the old sonneteers, but I don't want to do that. I want to introduce the sonnet structure by talking about a sonnet by Don Paterson. Now, this is Don Paterson's Landing Light. It's a book that was published a number of years ago. Let's see. I believe it's 2003, yes. And it won the T.S. Eliot Prize that year. Landing Light isn't all sonnets, but it's a wonderful collection of formal poetry. I would argue one of the best collections of formal poetry of the new millennium. I want to read a poem that is one of a number of poems in this collection that's about Paterson and his sons. He has several sons, and he writes about them. This is called The Thread. Jamie made his landing in the world so hard he plowed straight back into the earth. They caught him by the thread of his one breath and pulled him up. They don't know how it held. And so today I thank what higher will brought us to here, to you and me and Russ, the great twin engine swaying wingspan of us, roaring down the back of Kiri Hill. And your 2-year-old lung somehow out-revving every engine in the universe. All that trouble just to turn up dead was all I thought that long week. Now the thread is holding all of us. Look at our tiny house, son, the white dot of your mother waving. Now, I think you could read this poem and not notice it has a pretty formal rhyme scheme. Let's look at the rhyme scheme, because rhyme scheme is often the structure that's holding a sonnet together. Now, of course, there are 14 lines in a sonnet. Most people have heard that somewhere, but if you don't know, there's 14 lines in a sonnet. Yeah, people have tried to say, oh, this is a 13-line sonnet, or this is a 15-line sonnet, but sonnets have 14 lines. That's the tradition. The tradition is also that there's some variation of a rhyme scheme. There are two basic rhyme scheme types in sonnets. There's the Italian and the English. This is actually a variation of the Italian. And so I think this is a good poem to start with because it represents the older rhyme tradition. So what's going on with the rhyme? Well, we have world, earth, breath, held, will, Russ, us, hill, revving, universe, dead, thread, house, waving. Now, not all those words rhyme with each other. So what's going on? Well, let's think about the first 8 lines. World, earth, breath, held, will, Russ, us, hill. It's easier to see actually in those second set of 4 lines. Will, Russ, us, hill. That's just a good ABBA rhyme scheme. World, earth, breath, held has some what we call slant rhymes. So world and held both end with this d sound, but earl and l. It's a little different, but it's clear enough that there's a connection between them. Same with earth and breath. They both end with a th sound, but earth and breath, the and the are a little different. We might call this a slant rhyme Petrarchan structure. So we would have world, earth, breath, held, ABBA, and then will, Russ, us, hill, CDDC, and then revving, universe, dead, thread, house, waving. This is a structure that's kind of a chiastic structure. So revving and waving rhyme with each other. Universe and house have a similar rhyme pattern to, say, world and held. They both end with the same consonant. Verse and house, but and ow, clearly different vowel sounds. And then dead and thread are a nice couplet there in the middle. This is something that the Petrarchan rhyme scheme often does. It will have the last 6 lines have their own rhyme scheme with sometimes a C, D, E, C, D, E, or here a C, D, E, E, D, C rhyme scheme. The last 6 lines and the first 8 lines are kind of the 2 units, often broken off into their own stanzas within the Italian sonnet tradition. And so they have names to them. So the first 8 lines is called the octave or the octave, and the last 6 lines is called the sestet. Octave, of course, meaning 8 from oct, and sestet meaning 6 from ses. So you have this 8-6 structure. And often there's something that happens in the poem's narrative or argument that there's some change or development after the 8th line before the 9th line. And this is often called in the Italian tradition the volta, or the turn. This kind of turn of attention, maybe turn of argument, turn of mood. Let's think about how that's going on here. So we have the first 8 lines are kind of this picture of this dad and his sons playing as he meditates on the very scary kind of birth event of one of his sons, Jamie. So Jamie made his landing in the world so hard he's plowed straight back into the earth. They caught him by the thread of his one breath and pulled him up. They don't know how it held. So we have this sort of child. It's pretty metaphorical. It's hard for me to tell, what exactly medically went wrong, but there was something about he almost didn't make it. He almost didn't survive. And so today we have this turn kind of from line 4 to line 5. And so today I think what higher will brought us to here, to you and me and Russ, the great twin engine swaying wingspan of us, roaring down the back of Curie Hill. They're running down the hill, or maybe they're on a toboggan or a wagon, I'm not sure. But this wonderful description of a dad and his 2 sons as a great twin engine swaying wingspan, this kind of rickety, roaring thing, a dad and his sons. I love it. It could be potentially sentimental, but Paterson manages to not make it so. The turn is after Curie Hill, and it's interesting. There's not a period after Curie Hill. The turn, and your 2 years old lungs somehow out revving every engine in the universe. This is sort of a specification on from the dad and sons to Jamie himself, the one son that we had the meditation on his almost didn't make it story at the beginning of the sonnet. Your 2-year-old lungs somehow out revving every engine in the universe. All that trouble just to turn up dead was all I thought that long week. So now we're moving, this is another turn, kind of back to that kind of terror of a child being born, but there being a problem. Now the thread is holding all of us. Look at our tiny house, son, the white dot of your mother waving. There's this precarious happiness in this poem, and it's interesting, it's just the dad and sons, but then the final line brings the mother far away. And I think this idea of the thread, and after all, the poem is called the thread is connecting not just the son to life and not just the dad to the 2 sons, but the sons and the dad to the mother far off in the distance. It's a lovely poem. It shows us all the things that can go on in sonnets. There's a bit of remembrance of the past, focus on the present, comparison between the present and the past. It's about human relationship, about love, about the possibility of death. But it also is a structure that has fun rhymes that are sometimes exact, hill and will, and sometimes pretty inexact. Universe and house. It's interesting. The universe and the house are kind of like a macrocosm, microcosm, and the rhyme helps us think about the relationship between them. It's all very lovely. If we're going to think about sonnets, we need to start thinking both at the structural level and at the level of ideas and narratives and arguments. So this has been a poem by Don Paterson that I really love. We haven't talked about the meter. The meter is mostly iambic pentameter, but Paterson takes some liberties and has some wild variations that make it almost like he's kind of talking to us, or maybe talking to his son. It's worth hearing Paterson read this with his rich Scottish accent. Thanks for hanging out. I hope this has been helpful in thinking about the basics of the structure of the sonnet. 14 lines, usually about 10 syllables per line, often iambic pentameter in English, but not in other languages. And it's got a rhyme scheme that has these sort of mirrored structures of rhymes, ABBA, CDE, EDC, that poets play with, find variations on, almost like jazz, but always sticking to the same basic structure, basic timing. We'll look at the history of the sonnet in future videos, but I really recommend check out Don Paterson, check out Landing Light, check out his 40 sonnets. He's doing some really exciting things in contemporary poetry with this old form.